marketers. Deborah Eckerling here.
And I'm Keith Smith, and we host the MPN Meta Marketing Show, which is not just another marketing podcast, but the marketing podcast about all the other marketing podcasts.
Podcasts are booming, right? We love them, and people actually listen. They don't scroll, they don't swipe, well, except maybe during the ad breaks.
But here's the secret. With the Marketing Podcast Network, your ads don't make people hit skip. We put your brand on shows that people actually want to hear.
That's right. We match your message with podcasts that make marketing nerds like us perk up and take notes, or at least nod knowingly, pretending they understand.
And don't worry, because we'll deliver your ad naturally. People might even think that we love your brand personally, which of course we totally do, unless it's a veggie smoothie, then maybe not.
If you want your brand heard without making listeners roll their eyes,
head to marketingpodcasts.net and catch marketing fans at work, rest, and play. Seriously, your audience is already listening. Make sure they hear your brand and not our awkward jokes.
Join the conversation, because good ads shouldn't just be tolerated, they should be enjoyed.
Yes!
Toast the holidays in a new way and raise a glass of rum chata. A delicious creamy blend of horchata with rum. Enjoy it over ice or in your coffee. Rum chata, your holiday cocktails just got sweeter. Tap or click the banner for more. Drink responsibly. Caribbean rum with real dairy cream, natural and artificial flavors. Alcohol 13.75% by volume, 27.5 proof. Copyright 2025 Agave Logo Brands, Pewaukee, Wisconsin. All rights reserved.
I'm Nick Westergaard, and this is On Brand, helping you tell your story. Impact isn't a vibe, it's measurable. This week, I'm joined by Neil Callanan, LooseGrip founder and creator of the Grasp Impact Framework, to unpack how storytelling can stand up to scrutiny and move culture and the bottom line. My interview with Neil is coming right up, but first... Neil Callanan, welcome to On Brand.
Thanks for having me.
So I found myself, when I was talking about your company name, your framework name, when I said grasp, I don't know if the camera picked up on it, but I grasped up. So I don't know about the framework yet, but I know that my body had an unconscious response to saying the word. So as we talk about impact, what does grasp mean?
That's a great question. I think for us, when we were going about naming it, obviously it's a play off LooseGrip, but for us, grasping your impact or getting a grasp on your impact is, I think, a tangible way to kind of say, hey, we want to figure out what the data is actually telling us in a way that's tangible and actionable and insightful, right? And I think for us, you can get kind of mired down in the dashboards and the reports and all the things, and then not really walk away from it with too much of a grasp on what's working good and what's not working good and what we should do more of and what we should do less of. And so, when we set out to build a framework that would kind of make getting a grip on that all easier.
Boy, I really like that, because as you were talking about that, I thought about how we use the analogy of I want to get a grasp on something. And it's a great fit for metrics, because I always talk about this kind of weird dynamic, because as marketers and brand builders, we've never had more data than we have right now. And yet, the grasp on what it means is elusive. So you see people coming down on one side, or either overwhelming you with dashboards that look chef's kiss impeccable, but they don't always mean something. And then others just kind of say, oh, it's too squishy, can't, next slide. So how does grasp help us, being clumsy here, get a grasp on this?
Well, I like the way you were thinking about it. My favorite sort of tortured metaphor when we talk about data is Legos, right? And so if you think about, you have a box of Legos, and you get this pile of Legos, and if I gave you 100, you might be able to figure out what it was supposed to be built into. If I gave you 1,000, or I dumped a huge bucket, the more Legos I give you, the harder it is to figure out what I should build. Yes, the possibilities are greater, but the idea that you would get to, you just get paralyzed. And, our favorite analogy when we talk about dashboards is what often happens is all somebody's done is taken those Legos and like sorted them by color, right? And so you're like, it's really aesthetically pleasing. It feels good. You go, oh, look, all the red ones are with the red ones, and all the brown ones are with the brown ones, by size, I've done all these things. I'm still no closer to knowing what I should build and where I want the information to be helpful, right? So I think a lot of times it starts with, before you get into the data, for us thinking about like what would be the most actionable. Like, don't try to get the data and then figure out when it's actionable. Figure out where would actionability lie up front, and then go back and figure out how to get that with the least amount of complexity, right? Because I think the biggest mistake when we're not immune from it is there is no perfect dashboard. There's no perfect data set. It doesn't exist. And if it exists for an hour, and then API connector breaks or something, right? Like it's not going to work. And so, simplicity, I think, wins 99% of the time when it comes to analytics and insights. And we like to start our framework building by really just like getting as far away from the data as possible. And when I mean that, like, I literally mean off screens. We generally run a workshop where we're like big giant Post-it notes in a room. Everybody gets markers and stickers and stuff, just because like you gotta get out of the spreadsheet. You can't figure it out in a spreadsheet, right? You might be able to sort the data in a spreadsheet, sort your Legos in a spreadsheet, right? But you're not going to be able to figure out what the heck you want to build, So, I think it's about thinking hard about what would be actionable. And for a lot of brands, that's like, it's not that complex. It's like, do more of this and less of this. And if we could understand what to do more of and what to do less of, then you can go find the data that would tell you that. And that is not actually that complicated. But if you start with 17 different metrics and impressions and lifetime, like all these big, giant, good feeling data sets, it's still really hard to know what to do with it when you get a big, giant number, except to say, look how big this number is. I think that means we're doing well.
Yeah, I have 187 red Legos. So I don't know what that means or what I'm going to make out of them.
It looks good. Luckily, you're all organized.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a good reminder, especially this time of year as folks are looking ahead to the new year, to get out of the spreadsheet, that you're not going to, that may help you figure it out at some point, but it's not where it's going to start as well. So your work sits at the intersection of analytics and story, something we talk about a lot here on the show. And we recognize that story's important to brand building. But a lot of times when it comes to the impact conversation, we have difficulty, and I was going to say this on my own without the aided recall of your framework, but we have trouble getting a grasp on the impact of the stories that we tell as brands, and if that's doing what we want it to do. How can we connect those dots or decode?
Yeah, I think it's probably the thing you see more of today, where even pretty progressive brands, very activism forward, values forward brands, they're being second guessed about their efforts when it comes to anything, climate, politics. Why should we be doing this? It's all downside, right? And I think, with the right approach, you can quantify the impact, and quantifying it not only for the sense of the impact itself, right? So like, for example, we can pretty easily set up a framework that says, hey, how much did this storytelling result in people consuming that story, right? We created this big giant piece of content. Maybe it's a video series, a podcast, PDF, whatever. And we're trying to figure out, how do we understand how much time people spent consuming that content? Because ultimately, if you're generating stories, especially ones that are not directly tied to your product or your service, you got to figure out how to measure whether people actually listen to them. And, a lot of times that comes in the form of figuring out what metrics are most indicative of that. Again, none of the metrics are going to be perfect, but we know maybe a consumption metric is better than a view, right? Like a view could be anything from a millisecond to 30 minutes. So using those as the same metric are not going to be helpful towards understanding the impact that you're having. But I think the real opportunity for most brands lies in understanding how that activism or that values-based messaging impacts their bottom line. And it's not always necessarily as simple as, did profits go up that day? Did we sell more widgets on the website? Did we manage to get X new leads in the door? But I do think there's a mistake by not trying to understand the impact of it. So one of the things we look for is what we call the halo effect, which is basically like, you take a post, if you're say you're Ben & Jerry's, or you're a really progressive values-based brand, and you want to put a message out that is not tied to your ice cream. Maybe it's about your politics or values or getting people to register to vote, whatever it might be. People will often look to see, well, how many people engaged that or signed up to vote or did whatever the thing is. But the halo effect helps us understand what happens on the next post, right? So did the next post about ice cream get more engagement because of the post before it? Did our follower growth tick up? Did our number of deliveries for ice cream delivery the following day after that post that got a ton of algorithm reach, did it actually succeed outside of the context of the value itself, right? Like, did the post generate an impact on the bottom line? And I think a lot of times it does, but where marketers and brand builders specifically struggle is, how do they quantify that, right? How do you connect those dots? But I think right now, connecting those dots is more important than ever, because you're being questioned a lot of, why would we put money into brand building? Why would we put money into talking about our causes or the planet or whatever we're talking about? And if you can't quantify it, then it's the first thing that gets cut every time, right? It goes back to like, well, why don't we run more PPC for people looking for our widget? Well, you can, but that's not really building a brand. That's all, inbound people who are looking for a thing. And I would say a lot of these stories that people generate, the content they generate, it's designed to be consumed and hopefully then get more people to be kind of brand advocates tied to the brand, that kind of thing.
So I want to note that you talked about Ben & Jerry's, and I think a lot of times it's easy for us to, on a podcast interview, talking about, a progressive brand like Ben & Jerry's. I want to point out you've worked with Ben & Jerry's. I bring that up because most of us cite it as like the example for what's a brand who is, but that is one that you've worked with, and as I think back, Mike Hayes, who led their digital marketing.
Yeah, no, Mike well.
Oh yeah, well he was. I'm trying to think if it was guest number 2 or 3 here on the podcast. So
you should get him back. I'm pretty sure he's at Krispy Kreme now when he's not crushing the ski slopes of Vermont, which he's doing all day, every day.
Yeah, I have trouble not saying the Homer Simpson donuts. But what's separate? Because I think sometimes I always marvel at some people kind of get almost a little bit of attitude about some of these brands that we're always talking about, like Ben & Jerry's, like Nike. And yet you look at what they're doing and they're telling really powerful stories consistently over time. That's part of a bigger arc. Is there, that's what I say. Is there a smarter analysis from your perspective about those brands that really walk their talk over time?
I think it's all in authenticity, right? And that's going to sound pretty cliched or,
but it's hard to do.
You really got to do it, right? And I would say, it's really easy to see the brands who are not doing it. And so I always, like to say, like, well, if you don't know what to do, then go find the folks who are doing it the wrong way and don't do what they do, right? And, we see a lot of brands on Black History Month or on Veterans Day or on National Nurses Day say, we're so happy to support this cause. And it's the one post they put out a year, and they don't actually do anything to support the cause, and it's not part of their brand. It doesn't have anything to do with their brand. It's something HR told them to put out. And it just screams inauthenticity. And I think these brands who do it well, saying that they do it authentically means they believe it, and they believe in potentially putting content out there that doesn't directly mean they're going to sell more things the next day, and they do it either way because they believe it's the right thing to say, right? Like, I don't think there's any one right set of beliefs, but I think the brands who have a set of beliefs and then operate on said set of beliefs through intention, right? And so we're lucky to work with some really cool brands, and I would say it's not accidental, the content that they put out in the world. It's very intentional, and they often have content pillars and content objectives and very clear maps for how much do we think we want to talk about our product versus our purpose? How much do we want to put our stories about our athletes or our whatever? It's really intentional. And I would say the mistake a lot of folks, especially as they're building brands, make is they say, yeah, well, we're not Nike, right? We can't go out and create these stories.
Yeah,
but you can to say, we think we should dedicate 25% of our content resources towards telling stories about, maybe something that's just tangibly outside of what their product is or their service is, right? And I think being intentional about it often gets sort of downplayed as brands say, well, we don't have the resources to do that that's not who we are.
On Brand will be right back after this. Now, back to the show.
I want to phrase this next statement carefully. It is a weird time for brand activism. And I think you saw a lot of it. There's certainly political connections to that. You saw some people pulling back from. You saw you really probably, I guess, saw a bell curve. There's people pulling back from, there's people doubling down. Then there's kind of the middle that doesn't really know. And it still, for many, feels like a third rail that we don't want to grasp. I got to stop doing that, I promise.
No, don't stop. Keep going.
But how, as we sit here with the aforementioned new year ahead in this environment, how are you advising brands to think about brand activism and advocacy?
I would say there's two things. First is a lot about what I just said before, right? Like, it's more important than ever to measure and be able to quantify what you're doing. And so I would say, think about how to do that effectively. So not only the measurement, right? You need to measure the impact of your activism, period. But what I would also say is you probably need to bring your leadership along on that journey a little bit. And I think that's where people make a mistake a lot of times. So you'll have a marketing team or a brand team or a digital marketing team, and they have to speak to the CEO or the board or whoever. Those folks are just looking at it as risk. It's all risk to them. There's no upside. And so you really need to bring them along the journey to say, like I said before, let's look at the halo effect. Let us show you. I know that post scared you guys a little bit, but let me show you how many more widgets we sold the next day, right? I know that this long form investment in this long form narrative content feels heavy because it's not about how we make our product, but let me show you how much time our audience spent consuming it. The days, the months, the years worth of literal content consumption that might have happened. And I think a lot of times the mistake folks make is they don't take the time to educate their audience. And by their audience, I mean their leadership, their board, their CEO, whoever it might be. And then it just becomes a commodity. And they say, well, let's not put any more money over here because nobody can tell me what the purpose of it is, why we're doing it. And it seems expensive and risky. So I would say measuring your impact clearly is the thing I'm going to advocate for. But I would say also spend time thinking about how to communicate that internally. And I think that's one of the things that gets missed a lot. Find ways to bring your team, your leadership along in the journey. And that's going to come in the form of education, honestly, because a lot of these folks, if I am a CMO or a CEO, I don't have the mental capacity and space, bandwidth to understand how each metric works. What's the difference between video consumption and a view? I would guess 90% of CMOs could give you an approximated guess, but they don't really know the answer. And nor should they. They can't understand the difference between a unique visitor and a returning visitor or whatever. There's all these metrics that are really in the weeds. And I think as professionals who deal in the analytics space, there's oftentimes not the opportunity or the tendency to sort of bring folks along and say like, hey, let's just level set here. When we say content consumption, here's what we mean. Here's how we track that. Here's how we know that a visitor is spending time reading our content. Because then when you go to them and you say, this activism initiative led to 2.5 years worth of video consumption from our most engaged fans, they can understand it and they don't have to feel like you're just kind of bringing along a big number to sell them that you're doing a good job. We all want to prove that we're doing a good job. And the tendency is that, if you're an activism forward brand, you just painted it as all roses and as big a number as possible. And I would say, be real about it. Most folks appreciate it, especially at the leadership level. And it can bring a lot more credibility to the impacts that you say you have. And lastly, I'll just hit on, I think one of the big mistakes folks make when they're trying to promote their activism is not acknowledging downside, right? And there is downside, there is risk, there is opportunities for things to not hit the way that you want. But I think as marketers, a lot of times folks don't want to talk about it. It's like a third rail they don't want to look at. Like, let's not look at the downside. And I think the leadership gets really scared when nobody's willing to say, yeah, but what if, let's just pre-mortem it out. What might go wrong? That almost always makes folks more comfortable, right? And if you can't sell the idea in up front with the downside articulated,
right,
then maybe you shouldn't be doing it,
You talked about educating leaders, and I think the onus is on marketers to, kind of decode what we should be looking at. To that end, is there a metric that leaders think they need versus one they should actually be tracking?
It's a great question. We're big fans of, you've already heard me mention a few times, but we're big fans of consumptive metrics. And what I would say is there's a really big misconception in the marketplace of what qualifies as a view or a website visit or a engagement. And almost always what qualifies as those things from the platform's perspective is a pretty low bar. Like, so for example, most video views, when you have somebody come and say, this campaign drove 2 million video views, some of those views might literally be 1/10 of a second. And it's not even a view. It's like somebody was power scrolling through. So they just didn't not watch it, right? Like they didn't watch it. They just didn't scroll fast enough to get past it. And, I kind of try to attribute it when I'm talking to leaders as like, a lot of these metrics are just, if you were a retail store, it's people who drove by your store. Yes, I know billboard people, when they're selling ads, will tell you how many cars drove by, but like, that's not a real great way to gauge whether people are invested in your brand. And so if you think of a view as just somebody went by your store, they didn't go in, they didn't buy anything, they didn't look at anything, but they saw it for a second, right? It's not a great way to gauge the connection that you have with your audience. So we advocate for video consumption, whether that's on the average or the aggregate. I actually really like it on the aggregate level, meaning like, one of the things that's hard is how do you gauge success for a 10-second video versus a 10-minute video? And if you look at it as which drove more consumption over time, regardless of the length of the video, it's a really good way to think about how much brand equity you're building, because you're looking at how much attention did people spend consuming our content, how much time. One of the things I love to do in executive meetings is we'll put up a thing. We'll say, all right, we wanted to look at the video that was our top performer, or I'm trying to talk about the impact of this activism thing. And I'll say, this video might have had a 47-second average amount of video consumption. That is very hard for our human brains to understand how much time that is.
Yeah.
47 seconds is so long on the internet. So what I'll do is I'll have everybody all right, we're all just going to not say anything for 47 seconds. So you can feel tangibly how long that attention was that you gathered from your audience, because I'm taking the metric, right? And I'm giving it a little bit of a narrative and a little bit of story that somebody can understand. Because otherwise it's like 27 seconds versus 47 seconds. I don't know. I assume the number's bigger. But in the internet world, like 47 versus 27 is very huge chasm of this distinction and impact that you're having on your audience.
Absolutely. I love that. Not only, from both the metrics standpoint, but also communicating metrics, because that's an amazing way to bring to life time that people are spending with your brand. So I would say you just gave everybody that's hopefully consumptive metrics of this podcast consumed all the way to this point, because there's this great nugget that you've given us right here as we wrap things up. Well, you've made me feel better about myself by laughing at my pithy, or at least smiling along with my pithy grasp references.
Listen, our brand team is going to be so happy it got mentioned 100 times. We actually rebranded a couple years ago from a different name for Grasp. So
okay, well,
I'm happy to have the love.
I'm happy I can be part of the metric story. But with all this smiling, it is now my turn to get to ask you, Neil, for a brand that has made you smile recently.
Yeah, I love this question. I thought about it a lot, honestly. I think the answer is Rivian. So I drive a Rivian, and I'm not a person who's really ever had. I don't think I've literally ever owned a brand new car, but I just wanted to experience it, right? So I bought this car, and their user experience, it's an electric truck, it's a startup as a company. They just put so much attention to detail into the little Easter eggs and the things that make you smile. Like the example I'll give you is that the week before Halloween, they launch a Halloween mode for the car. And on your app, you can turn your car into like making ghoulish noises, and the light bars will do weird stuff. And like the whole car just turns into basically like a big giant Halloween experience. That there's no way they didn't lose a ton of money spending time creating that thing, right? It was a big investment. I'm sure they had software engineers who should have been figuring out something else. But the experience I'll tell you right now, my daughter would never want us to buy another car, right? It's such you get the kids to enjoy it. It brings joy to people, the happiness of it. They do some really neat stuff. They when you buy your car, they send you a little like stuffed animal version of the guy who shows up on the screen and stuff. Like they do a great job, and I'm hopeful they'll continue to succeed and stay around. But either way, their brand, their investment in their brand, and the relationships and kind of the equity that they build, they've just done in a really smart, intentional way that honestly, it makes me like a huge advocate. And the car's not without problems. It's a brand new brand. There's things that I have challenges with, as all brands do, but you kind of give them a pass because they make owning one be so much fun,
Yeah. I sitting here listening to that and thinking, my car did nothing for me for Halloween, so going to have a word.
Yeah.
Neil, where can folks go to learn more about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So you can find me probably on LinkedIn. I post a fair amount of brand and analytics related content, and I'm Neil, Neil Callanan, Callanan on LinkedIn. And then if you want to hear any more about our workshops or the GRASP framework, it's graspyourimpact.com.
Awesome. Well, we will link up to all of that in our show notes, which folks can always find at onbrandpodcast.com. Neil, thanks for being on brand with us.
Thank you, man. It's been great.
On Brand is part of the Marketing Podcast Network. If you like what you're hearing, if we've made you smile, you can always listen free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite platform may be. And please take a moment and rate and review the podcast to help others find the show. Until next week, I'm Nick Westergaard, and I'll see you on the internet.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Hennika Watkins-Porter hosts The Entrepreneurial You, empowering entrepreneurs with insights on leadership, business, and success. Hennika, tell listeners what to expect from your show.
So we provide innovative business strategies and practical solutions to common entrepreneurial challenges.
And where can people subscribe?
Find us at hennikawatkinsporter.com, as well as the Marketing Podcast Network at marketingpodcasts.net, or search for it wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard her. Go subscribe. This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.